Oh, sanding. Man. Gotta love sanding. Oh, you guys are back. Hey. I'm just doing a little sanding right here. I'll be right with you. So who doesn't love hand sanding? Am I right? It's a lot of fun, isn't it? Gets all over the place. Should be wearing that mask, okay, for the dust. But it is a necessary evil. And honestly, there is a little bit of therapeuticness to it. You don't have to think too much. You kind of just let your fingers feel what needs to be done. But you're not here to see me sand. Let's talk about this project, Belle. And let's talk about how the predominance of people wanted to see a faux binding on this bad boy, even though it wasn't one of the choices. Y'all are like my students. I tell you, you can do it this way or this way, and they want to do it another way. That's true, too. Okay, I promised in this episode that we'd talk about the binding and or radiusing for a burst, but it looked like several of you wanted to see a faux binding, and I thought, you know, that would look pretty cool. But I mentioned in my last video that we would try to do the faux binding. If it doesn't work, we're going to end up with a burst, okay? And why do I say if it doesn't work? Well, another person in one of my videos recently asked me a question which I didn't reply to, and I apologize for that, folks, if I don't respond to your comments. I do read them all, but and a lot of those things I try to address in my videos, but I just don't have the time to go through and respond to all of them. But anyway, the question was how to do the drop top on the Strat style guitar. And that is a whole lesson in itself. But the way I did this one, because like everything, there's multiple ways to do it. The way I did this one, it's going to make it a little bit more challenging to do that faux binding. And that is because the technique I used on this guitar specifically was to take that 1/4-inch maple and actually score with a saw blade 2 lines going down the break point of the forearm contour, and that makes it easier under vacuum pressure for it to bend down. And I wet the wood pretty good so it's more flexible than brittle, and I get it to bend down with that. So what you will probably even see from that camera angle is 2 holes on this side and 2 holes on that side. Now, if I would have known that so many of you would be asking me to do a faux binding on this top, I would have used heat and pressure with a mold to basically bend this gently by heating the wood and getting it nice and moist and allowing it to ease over. And typically when I do that, I like to build my molds for about an extra 10% bend that I want, because some of it will spring back out. That takes a lot more effort. So when I know I'm going to either be doing a binding or a burst, I will score the bottom right across that break point, and that makes the bending process a little less dramatic. You know, it's a little easier. It's really like bending an 1/8-inch piece of wood, and if you ever use an 1/8-inch drop top, that's easy to bend. Okay, so anyway, that's where we're at. So I've got a couple things that I'm going to have to do that I may or may not like in the end, and we'll see. But I will begin prepping this for the faux binding. And the first thing that I'm going to have to do, because of my square holes, is to try to make some square pegs that I can fill in those square holes. So let's get set up for that. So before we get going in how we're going to try to overcome this square hole dilemma, let's back up and explain why was I sanding when this video started. Well, number one, because I didn't want to sand during the video. What a waste of video time. But here's the point of that. The point is, if we're going to do a faux binding, we're going to need to do a round over to the top edge. Okay, in fact, we're going to do a round over to the back edge, different sizes that we're going to use. But in order to use a bit that has a bearing following mechanism, you really need to make sure that the sides are perfectly flat and perfectly smooth. Smooth from a sense that there's no bumps or dips, not so much smooth from a sense of absolutely sanded to final finish sanding. That'll come later. So I was working on that, and I just wanted to point out, in full disclosure, I was using oscillating spindle sander for most of this work in here, but there still is always hand work that is required. And so I like to use these 100% EVA rubber for wet dry sanding. They're actually blocks, and I've probably mentioned in other videos that I got off of Amazon, a big kit with different shapes and different sizes, and I can take them to the chop saw and cut them off to whatever length and sometimes whatever width that I want, and I generally match the sandpaper with it. But I like using these because they're pretty firm, but there is a little bit of give to it, and so it works well on getting the final little humps and bumps out of there. And when you're doing that, you're really going to have to use your fingers as a guide, because you can't see minor little deviations, but your fingers can feel them. So you want to do that. Now let's get back to the main thing we're doing. I grabbed a scrap piece of bird's eye maple, and I'm going to try to use that because it's got pretty good color match to it, and we're going to try to make little square pegs to go in square holes. Now, little tools is kind of helpful for stuff like this. Behind me, you'll see my Burns model machine sander that I've done a video on in the past, and this is the regular version, not the modified version that I use for headstocks. And I took this piece of bird's eye maple and I took it down to about 2.2 millimeters thick, which is approximately what the height of those holes. Height and width are pretty square, actually, so somewhere around that. Now I'm going to break out the little tiny Burns saw, and I'm just going to cut some little bitty strips, and I'm thinking that's about 2 millimeters, but I'm going to probably have to do a couple test cuts to get it nailed perfectly. But we're going to do those cuts with this saw. Why are we doing it with the little saw? Because we don't need the big saw. Okay, who needs a 5 horsepower, 12-inch saw blade to make a little tiny cut like that? That's a stinking scary machine. This is not so scary, but we're still got to use some safety precautions. So I'm going to get another piece of wood to hold this piece of wood down as I feed through so my fingers aren't in the way. And we don't need to shove that toothpick all the way down. I'm just going to take it in an inch, whatever it'll travel, and I'll end up tapping it in with a little fret hammer and get that just to fill the ends. Now that's not going to be perfect because I'm not grabbing the exact same area of the grain of the scrap woods from the top and feeding it through there ever so perfect. So in the end, after we've got this all set and we're ready for the final prep and finish and stuff like that, we may have to do some faux grain in our faux binding, and we may have to do it faux times, 2 on each side. All right, now let's do a little bit of delicate surgery. All right, so it's about 2.5 by 2.2 millimeters. So we'll get the right orientation there. And that's about 1 inch long. And we'll tap that in. We'll take a dull razor blade and we'll slice that off because my sharp ones are out of my reach right now. Don't tell me no one's ever done that before. You have a perfectly good tool in the drawer, but there's one closer, so you use the other one. Okay. Took that one in a couple inches. Okay, we're going to let those dry, and then we're going to sand them back flush again so that it's ready for our routing process. Meanwhile, might as well get the other two, eh? I took the sanding block and flushed up the pins that we glued into there. And I'm not going to show you a close-up because I don't want you to judge me. But trust me, in the end, they're going to be fine. One thing that's handy to have is a good assortment of roundover bits. I've got here 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 5/16, and 3/8. So we are going to use the traditional 3/8 inch roundover for the back of this guitar because we can do it all the way around, no issues whatsoever, and nothing to really worry about. Now I will say that the one area you want to watch out for on the back with a 3/8 inch roundover is you kind of fade it out before you get to the back of the heel, and do the same thing on this side before you get to the back of the heel. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that, but in the end I'm going to have a neck heel relief area back there, so it won't really matter, but we will pay attention to that. On the top side, the Stratocaster would normally have the 3/8 inch roundover too, but because we only have a 1/4 inch top, we are going to select the 1/4 inch roundover. So we're going to reduce the rate of roundover, but that is so that we have a clean edge right where the alder stops, and we don't carry that roundover into the alder. That just wouldn't give the look that we're looking for out of this. The look that we're looking for. Okay, that makes sense. It really does. So we're going to use that on the top. Now the only problem area that we're going to have on the top is where the forearm contour is, because this router bit will end up coming around here and losing clearance and then coming back in touch with it. So we have to be really careful in those two transitional areas. And this will not do a very effective job at that roundover on a sloped contour. We could use an overhead routing system, which will do a little bit better job, but really the only way to do a perfect job with bits is with a CNC, because you can program it to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start and stop right around the transition of the drop top, and we're going to do the rest by hand after the routing is done, and we're going to match it up, and so it's going to look fine, it's going to be fine. I don't want you to worry about a thing. Let's set up that router table and start making some cuts, eh? All right, we got the 3/8 inch roundover bit in there, and that's what we're going to do the back with. Whenever I have areas that I want to avoid routing, for instance, the back of the heel, I want to do those first, because if I don't do them first while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to probably forget and continue routing all the way around there. All right, got a nice roundover all the way around there. So let's switch out the bit and go to the front side. So I don't know if you were watching closely, but as I brought the 1/4 inch bit around, I was paying close attention to that forearm contour, and making sure that I pulled the guitar body away before the bearing left the edge of the wood, because that could certainly slide under, and then that rotating hex bolt at the top is going to start marring, that selection of that portion of the finish. So you don't want to do that. So pay close attention and stop while the bearing is still on. And then you saw over here, I started where the bearing would be in contact. And that just leaves me this little bit of area from here to here that I've got to manually try to match the contour. And it looks like the contour is pretty good. I'd say I still would have had maybe a 1/16 inch to spare on the flat spot there, but that will probably come out in the sanding process, and that's going to look pretty tight. Like it. To complete the round over, choose your weapon. You know what? You can never go wrong with the dragon file. But sometimes I like these other guys too. A little razor file. That actually does a pretty nice job on this. But you don't want to be too aggressive. You want to take your time, and I think the dragon file is a little slower, so I'm going to use that one mostly. It's the fine dragon file. And all I'm trying to do is match the other contour, and then I'll sand those to kind of blend them all together. I learned an important rule one time, and that is it's easier to take a little bit more wood off than it is to put wood back on. So, go easy, go slow, don't get in a hurry. Now this is not my most ergonomic position here. I'm doing it so you guys can still see. Notice how I'm already making excuses just in case I mess up. Key point. Always have a back pocket excuse. Another nice little tool here, just a little concave sanding rubber, I guess is what you'd call it. Kind of helps prevent the facets if you do too much with a block. So that'll kind of help blend those areas together. Don't ask me where I got this. I think I got it like 20 years ago. Probably still sell them. We're going to clean this up with sanding all the way around. Had enough of watching me sanding? I think you get the idea. All right, use whatever tools that you have available to you and sand and blend and smooth that radius all the way around until it feels right. And that's when you stop. And next episode, we're going to go ahead and do the belly cut in this guy, and that will be an adventure. So until then, remember, no matter what you do, start with excellence.